In this module, we're going to take a look on how to distribute materials over the whole project. And as a last big challenge to Vex, we're going to create a random path for a camera. But let's start with the materials. It would take way too much time to dig into the details of materials and shading, so I will only use the default materials from the material palette. But the general idea of course also applies to more complex material shaders. For testing purposes, I start with a very basic material coming from the principal shader. To make it easy to see, I change the base color to a bright red and deactivate use point color. There are always different ways to do this, but in a project this complex, a good way to handle materials would be to use the material style sheets. And that's what I'm going to do. So on the data tree tab, I'm going to create a new style sheet and call it style sheet Pluralsight. Style sheets in itself can be a complex topic on its own. So I'm going to keep it simple and keep it down to the content that we need for this project. The style sheet can hold multiple styles. And with a single style, I want to choose which geometry is assigned to a specific material. After I created a style, I can create an override. That override can be used to set a specific material parameter or even select the material itself. We want to set a material, so with the override type material, we have to choose a value. Select the created basic material, and as you can see, obviously our whole geometry got assigned the basic material. Now that we know it's working, let's take the color out of the material and use a gray tone. As you can see in the background, this lets the original geometry show its own point color, even though the material in itself doesn't use the point color. It's a good idea to set a basic material that gets applied if you miss something. But of course we want different materials on different pieces of the geometry. So let's do that and create another style, and this time we want to target the gates specifically. So on the style, right click and add a target. The default setting is already on primitive, but since we want to select specific primitives, we need to add a condition, and that condition can be a primitive group. I want to set a material to the primitive group gate, which doesn't exist at this moment, but first let's get the material we want to apply. Let's use coated metal paint. I make it a bit darker and deactivate use point color. Then we can go back to the style sheet and select the material for the override. Now that this is set up, we need to tell the gates that they belong into the gate group. We can find them in the gates network and in the place gates for each subnetwork. And what we need to do is pretty simple. We only need to create a group node which takes the whole gate geometry and puts it into the group we defined in the style sheet. Now this would already work with normal geometry, but the problem is the gate alongside with most of the geometry is packed, which means the target of the style sheet can't find this primitive group. But to handle packed geometry, you just need to add a subtarget. That target is also set to primitive, and this is the place where we set the condition. The gate is already red, since we don't have a condition active at the moment, but after we apply it again, the gate stays red. When we now leave the network and position the viewport, you can see that in fact only the gates have been assigned with the material. I'm going to add a number of materials meant for the separate classifications of geometry in this project. For each material, I'm going to create a style that assigns the material to a group. And we continue with the prepared materials and style sheets in the next clip.